I found a private property sign in my own backyard. A few months ago, I woke up to a feeling I couldn't shake. My home wasn't really mine anymore. Not in the way it used to be. It wasn't like I woke up to find strangers on the couch or the walls repainted. It wasn't about the physical space, it was the emotional one. My own yard, the place I thought was my sanctuary, had become a battleground, and it started with a simple, seemingly harmless favor. Let me explain. My wife, Carrie, and I had been living in our cozy house in Eugene, Oregon for a few years now. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours. The backyard was our little slice of peace. We had a small patch of grass for our dog, Baxter, and a couple of chairs for those nights we just wanted to relax with a beer, staring at the sunset. Life was simple, nothing extraordinary. But it was ours. Then her parents, Dale and Marlene, moved in. It wasn't an emergency. It wasn't that they were struggling or anything like that. It started with a phone call, a simple inquiry from Carrie about them moving closer to us. Her parents were thinking about selling their place in Klamath Falls and moving into our town for a bit. Carrie assured me it would be just a temporary thing, maybe a few months at most. I was hesitant at first, but I agreed. They were family, and family is what you help when they need it, right? Well, that temporary visit stretched far beyond what I expected. At first, I didn't mind too much. Dale was in his 70s, and he had that old guy who thinks he knows everything about everything vibe. Marlene, on the other hand, was quieter, sharp-eyed, and kept her distance, at least at first. But over time, they started to move in more than just their suitcases. The first thing that got me was the garden. It started small. Marlene suggested they use a portion of our backyard to grow some vegetables. Carrie thought it was a good idea. Honestly, I didn't care. I didn't use the space anyway, and if it kept her parents busy, why not? I helped Dale put in a few raised garden beds, and we dug up part of the lawn to make space for it. I figured, no harm, right? I mean, I didn't think much of it. It seemed like a harmless, even charming, hobby for them to take up. But as time went on, things started to change. At first, the garden felt like a nice gesture. Marlene and Dale were enjoying themselves, staying active, and growing their own food. What's not to love about a few tomatoes and herbs, right? But soon, what was supposed to be a small gardening project took on a life of its own. By midsummer, the raised beds were barely recognizable. Dale added more, then built a small greenhouse with plastic sheeting from Home Depot. Marlene insisted on enhancing the space with a few decorative touches, small solar lights strung across the fence, gnome statues, a couple of fake garden fairies. The garden didn't just grow, it expanded, taking over more and more of our yard. The boundary between my space and theirs was starting to blur, and I wasn't sure when or how it had happened. Then, one day, it clicked. I'd stepped into the yard, just to grab something from the shed, and noticed the little things. The way Baxter, our dog, was now being reminded to stay away from the plants. How Dale would give me unsolicited gardening advice, correcting my watering technique like I was some amateur. And Marlene, who used to be so reserved, had started snapping at Baxter if he got too close to the tomato vines. It was subtle at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how out of control it had become. The garden was no longer just something they were enjoying. It was their territory. I tried to talk to Carrie about it, but the conversation always felt like a battle I couldn't win. Baxter should be able to roam freely in his own yard, I said one evening. Carrie sighed, as though she was tired of hearing it. Just let them have their space, Eric. It's not a big deal. But it was a big deal. Because every time they added another bed, another fence, another decorative windmill, I felt my own space shrinking. I felt like I was being pushed out of the home I'd worked so hard to build. Then came the shed. I remember the day Dale bought it. It was this prefab wooden structure, one of those cheap kits you put together yourself. He put it in the farthest corner of the backyard, right next to the garden. At first, I thought it was just for storing gardening tools. But soon enough, it was full of Dale's junk, old seed packets, tools, bags of soil. I figured it was temporary, so I let it slide. But when winter came and the garden went dormant, the shed didn't. It stayed. And with it, the little solar lights, the wind chimes, and the strange feeling that I was living in someone else's dream. And then came the sign. It was in January, right after the holidays, when I came home from work one night to find something that pushed me over the edge. I pulled into the driveway, tired from the day, ready to put my keys on the counter and relax. But as I stepped out of the car, something caught my eye. A wooden sign. At first, I thought I was seeing things. But there it was, planted firmly in the ground, right at the edge of the garden, just before the patio area. The sign read in bold letters, "Private property, do not enter." I froze. I walked over, my heart pounding in my chest, and touched the sign. It was solid. Sturdy. Carefully painted, clearly meant to stay. I pulled it from the ground. Yanked it, really. My hands were shaking as I held it, staring at it like it might disappear. But it didn't. I was furious. Later that evening, I waited for Carrie to get home. She didn't know about the sign yet, and I was beyond frustrated. I laid it on the kitchen table, right in front of her. She looked at it, then looked at me. There was this long pause. I could see the tension in her shoulders. "You pulled it out," she said, sounding almost annoyed. "What the hell is this, Carrie?" I asked, voice rising. "Private property in our backyard?" She rubbed her forehead, exhaling like I just asked a dumb question. "Eric, it's just a joke. My dad gets protective about the garden. He didn't mean anything by it." "It's not a joke," I shot back. "It's a power move. They're treating our backyard like it's their property." Carrie sighed deeply, folding her arms across her chest. "You've been so controlling about it. You never cared about the backyard before they started using it. Now, suddenly, you have a problem." That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't about a garden anymore. It wasn't about tomatoes or the shed or the little gnome statues. This was about power. Control. Territory. It felt like my house was slipping from my grasp, and no one cared. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stood at the window, staring out at the yard. I saw Dale walking into the garden, looking at the spot where the sign used to be. He shook his head, clearly frustrated, and then went into the shed. The whole thing made me feel sick. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do something. I'd let it slide for too long, convinced that things would work themselves out. But this was different. The sign, the garden, the shed, it wasn't just about plants anymore. It was about respect. It was about ownership. And it was about drawing the line. I wasn't the one who had crossed it, but I was the one who had to reclaim it. I grabbed my phone and searched for a lawyer. I knew I needed professional advice before things got any messier. Dale had clearly crossed into territory he shouldn't have, and it was time to see what legal standing I had. The next morning, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, scrolling through the photos I had taken of the backyard. I showed Mitchell, my lawyer, the pictures of the raised garden beds, the shed, and most importantly, the sign. They put up a sign saying, "Private property," I explained. "It's my yard, and I never signed anything over. I'm just not sure where I stand." Mitchell flipped through the photos, his brow furrowed. "It's clear they've overstepped," he said. "They've treated the space as if it's theirs. You have legal rights to the property, especially since it's in your name. But if this goes to court, we'll need to build a case." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. At least someone understood. That afternoon, I went home and found Carrie sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I took a deep breath, then walked straight up to her. "We need to talk," I said. She glanced up, her expression guarded. "About what?" she asked, like she already knew. "About the house," I said. "About your parents. About who gets to make decisions in my backyard." Carrie sighed. She set her phone down and crossed her arms. "Eric, come on. They're just trying to feel at home." I shook my head. "This isn't about feeling at home. This is about them taking over my space." "My space, Carrie. You didn't even mention the $60,000 they gave us. You used it for the mortgage without telling me. That's a huge deal, and you know it." Her face paled. She was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing everything I had said. Then, she finally spoke. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd react like this. I thought it was for the best. You know how hard things have been, and they wanted to help. I didn't want to upset you. I was beyond upset. I was furious. And I couldn't hold it back anymore. You went behind my back, Carrie. And now, your parents are treating our house like it's theirs, and you're backing them up. I don't even know who I'm married to anymore. Her face flushed. I could see the guilt on her face, but it didn't change the fact that I felt betrayed. I never wanted this to be a fight, she said softly. I wanted them to feel included. Included? I snapped. They're running the place. You let them take control, and now they've marked their territory. That sign. That's not a joke. It's a declaration. The next day, Dale knocked on our bedroom door. Can we talk? He asked. His voice was smooth, almost too smooth. I said nothing. I just opened the door, waiting for whatever he had to say. He stepped inside and sat at the edge of the bed. I think we've had a breakdown in communication, he said, like this was some business negotiation. I didn't even try to hide my frustration. No, Dale, I said firmly. We've had a breakdown in respect. He smirked. Look, I understand you're upset, but we've spent a lot of time and money on that garden. It's become part of our routine, part of our mental health. We can't just abandon it now. I stood up, heart racing. It's not your land, I said, voice steady but full of anger. It's my backyard. And I never signed anything over. His expression didn't change. He just leaned forward, like he was about to strike a deal. You keep saying it's your property, but Carrie and you are married. She invited us in, and she's made it clear that she considers the yard part of our shared family space. So, if you want peace, you need to accept that. I couldn't believe my ears. Peace. I laughed, but it came out colder than I meant. You've been taking over my yard, Dale, and now you want me to just accept it. He smiled, clearly pleased with himself. Exactly. That was it. That moment sealed it for me. There was no going back. I had to fight for what was mine. Later that evening, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I called a lawyer. I needed to know where I stood because I wasn't about to let two people who didn't pay a dime for the house dictate what happened in it. The next day, I sat down with Carrie and laid everything out. We need to talk about who's in charge here, I said. This isn't just about a garden anymore. This is about control. She folded her arms, defensive. Eric, it's not a dictatorship. No, I said, my voice firm. But it sure as hell isn't a democracy where your parents get to vote. She didn't answer. She just walked away. That night, Dale came to talk to me. I knew this conversation wasn't going to go the way I wanted, but I wasn't backing down. The next morning, things took another turn, and I knew I had to act fast. The day after that tense conversation, I woke up early, too early to be fully awake, but I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. I needed to take control of the situation before it spiraled any further. I called my lawyer, Mitchell, and laid out everything: the garden, the shed, the sign, the money Carrie had taken from her parents without my knowledge, and the growing feeling that my home was slipping away. Mitchell listened carefully. You have strong grounds, he said. But it's going to take clear evidence and firm actions. He laid out a game plan. First, change the locks. Second, secure your personal accounts and legal documents. Third, prepare to challenge any claims by Carrie or her parents to shared ownership or control. Within the week, I was standing in front of new locks, holding keys that no one else had. It was a small victory, but a symbolic one. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. Meanwhile, I reached out to Carrie to talk again. She was defensive, but I was calm and direct. This house is in my name. Your parents aren't tenants. You can't give away parts of my property without telling me. She said nothing at first. Then, after a pause, she told me the truth. They gave me $60,000 from selling their house. I used it to pay down the mortgage. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd react like this. That crushed me. More than the garden. More than the sign. More than the constant encroachment. It was the betrayal. The next day, I came home early from work. I pulled into the driveway and saw Dale and two other men surveying the backyard with tape measures and blueprints. One was a contractor. They were planning a pergola, a raised deck, and a water feature. I felt my blood boil. Before I could say anything, Carrie appeared behind me. "We're just trying to fix it up," she said. I shook my head. "You're building on my land without permission. You're making it a war zone." That night, I packed a bag and took Baxter to a hotel. I needed space to think. To plan. To figure out how to protect what was mine. Over the next few weeks, Mitchell helped me file motions. We sent cease and desist letters to Dale and Marlene, declaring them trespassers. We gathered proof, photos, videos, messages. I even contacted Carrie's sister, Monica, who had her own stories about Dale and Marlene taking over her space. She agreed to testify if it came to court. The day in court was tense. Carrie arrived calm, Dale confident. But the judge wasn't buying their claims. After hours of testimony, it was clear they had no legal right to the house or the garden. The $60,000 was considered a gift, not a loan. The judge ordered Carrie, Dale, and Marlene to leave within 30 days. And issued a no trespassing order. I came home that evening and looked around the yard. The shed, the pergola frame, the signs, they all had to go. I hired a crew to demolish everything. I even sold the wood and fencing online, donating the money to a local animal shelter. When Carrie came to collect her things, she asked why I'd gone so far. I said, "Because I needed you all to remember whose house this is." She looked at the empty yard and said coldly, "You'll be alone forever." I smiled. Better alone than overrun. That night, sitting on the new deck with Baxter, I felt peace. No wind chimes. No signs. Just quiet. Real quiet. And for the first time in a long time, it was mine. The dust from the demolition had barely settled before I realized something important. This was more than just a yard cleanup. It was the clearing out of old wounds, misplaced loyalties, and fractured trust. For years, I'd tolerated creeping invasions of my space, my life, my peace. I'd brushed off small irritations because, well, family. Because love. But real love doesn't require you to lose yourself. Real love doesn't turn your home into a battleground. That night, sitting outside on my modest new deck, Baxter's head resting on my lap, I finally felt it, peace. Not the fleeting kind that disappears with a raised voice or a slammed door, but steady, quiet peace. This journey taught me how to set boundaries that actually stick. How to say no when my gut says yes to escape. How to protect the spaces, physical, emotional, mental, that keep me sane. I learned that sometimes the hardest fights aren't with others, but with yourself, the fear, the doubt, the impulse to keep the peace at your own expense. Rebuilding wasn't easy. Trust was fragile. Every interaction with Carrie was a test. Could we coexist without war? Could we find respect beneath the rubble? Some days, yes. Some days, no. But I stopped expecting perfection. I only expected honesty and effort. And as the garden beds gave way to an open lawn and the shed's absence made room for sunlight, I realized I was growing too. Growing into a man who knows his worth. Who owns his story. Who refuses to be steamrolled, silenced, or sidelined. Most importantly, I learned that home isn't just a place. It's a feeling. And that feeling, it's worth fighting for. Once I took back control of my space, everything shifted. The tension that had lingered like a thick fog slowly began to lift. It wasn't magic, no sudden fairy tale transformation, but a steady, deliberate process of rebuilding. I found myself saying no more often. No to unreasonable demands. No to toxic dynamics disguised as family obligations. No to silence when my voice needed to be heard. And with each no, I felt more whole. Carrie and I started talking, not just about the house, but about us. It wasn't easy. We had to face years of misunderstandings, resentment, and hurt. But for the first time, the conversations weren't one-sided. They weren't about control or blame. They were about listening. We agreed on boundaries, not just physical, but emotional ones. Her parents wouldn't be involved in decisions without both of us agreeing. Our home would be our sanctuary, not a playground for power struggles. And while things weren't perfect, this framework gave us a foundation to rebuild trust. More importantly, I rebuilt trust in myself. I learned that standing up for my rights didn't make me the villain. It made me a protector. A man who values his peace and dignity. A man who won't be steamrolled by passive-aggressive tactics or silent invasions. Friends noticed the change. They told me I seemed calmer, more centered. More like myself. The kind of self who smiles not out of obligation, but because she's genuinely happy. The future feels uncertain, sure. But for the first time in a long time, it feels like mine. And I'm ready to face it, on my terms. Setting boundaries with Dale and Marlene was just the beginning. Once the backyard was back under my control, I realized the real challenge was keeping the peace inside the house, with Carrie, with her family, and even within myself. Our marriage became a tightrope walk. Carrie wanted to keep the family peace, to avoid confrontations, and to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. I wanted honesty and respect, not just for me, but for the space and life we built together. Sometimes those two things felt at odds. Her parents didn't easily accept the limits. Dale would drop by unannounced. Marlene expected to be included in every family decision. They often called or texted Carrie late at night, expecting updates, favors, or invitations. I found myself constantly guarding the lines I'd fought so hard to draw. The hardest part wasn't their stubbornness, it was Carrie's loyalty. She loved her parents. She wanted to honor them. But at times, it felt like she was choosing them over me. That feeling cut deep. It took long talks, therapy, and a lot of patience to start bridging the gap. I learned that boundaries aren't about building walls, they're about creating respect. They're about teaching people how to treat you. And sometimes, people don't like the lessons. Sometimes, you have to hold firm, even when it's uncomfortable. In those moments, I reminded myself why I fought for my space. For peace. For my sanity. For the life that I wanted to build, one where love wasn't conditional, and respect was mutual. Home is more than four walls and a patch of grass. It's the place where you can be yourself without fear. Where your voice matters. Where peace isn't just a dream but a daily reality. After everything with the garden, the shed, and the signs, I began to see my house differently. It wasn't just a property. It was a sanctuary. A space where I could breathe. That shift wasn't easy. It came with hard conversations. Silent nights. Moments of doubt and loneliness. But it also came with small victories. Like watching Baxter run freely in the yard without being shooed away. Like sitting on my deck with a cold beer and feeling calm for the first time in years. Like knowing that when I close the door, I'm in control. I started to rebuild not just my physical space but my sense of self. I reclaimed my confidence, my voice, my power. I stopped shrinking to fit anyone else's expectations. I embraced the messy, imperfect, authentic version of me. And in that process, I found freedom. Freedom to live on my terms. Freedom to protect what matters. Freedom to say no without guilt. Freedom to heal and grow. As the backyard returned to a space of peace, so did my sense of control over my life. I realized that reclaiming my home wasn't just about fences or legal battles, it was about reclaiming my voice. The voice I'd silenced for years to avoid conflict. The voice that said, enough. That voice started to echo beyond the yard. It changed how I showed up in my marriage. How I spoke to Carrie. How I set expectations for us both. We still struggled, but the difference was clear. I was no longer the quiet one swallowing everything. I was a partner who demanded respect. This new foundation gave me the courage to dream. To imagine a future where my boundaries were honored. Where love wasn't conditional on silence or compliance. Where peace wasn't something I hoped for but something I cultivated. I began planning projects that were just for me. A small deck where I could sit and watch the sunset with Baxter. A workshop in the garage to tinker on my own terms. Spaces that reflected not just ownership, but identity. And as I built those spaces, I built myself. Stronger. Clearer. More at home. If there's one thing I want anyone who's been through something like this to know, it's this. Your peace matters. Your home matters. Your boundaries matter. And sometimes, standing up for all three feels like the hardest battle you'll ever fight. But it's also the most important. Because when you refuse to be steamrolled, when you refuse to let others decide your worth, when you reclaim your space and your voice, you're not just protecting a backyard. You're protecting your soul. It's okay to say no. It's okay to draw the line. It's okay to walk away from toxic situations, even if it means shaking up family dynamics. You deserve to be heard. To be safe. To be whole. And if you're reading this, feeling like the odd one out, know that you're not alone. There's strength in your story. Power in your truth. And a whole world of people rooting for you, even when it feels like no one else is. Thank you for reading my story. If it resonates, please share it. Your story matters. Your voice is powerful. And your peace is worth fighting for. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this story. If you've ever felt like your peace or your space wasn't respected, I hope hearing my journey reminds you, you deserve better. You deserve respect, boundaries, and a home that feels like yours. If this story resonated with you, please drop a comment or share your own experience. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories and honest conversations. We're building a community where your voice matters and your story is safe. Take care of yourself, stand firm in your truth, and I'll see you next time.